add value to your business, or do you want to just be this administrative person?
And often if you look at your talent team and the caliber of talent in your company, they correlate.
You could hire the best person for the job if they were in your candidate pool.
All these individual employees, one by one, together, their voices all come together to articulate the culture of the company.
We believe in, getting back to the basics of, hey, we have all this data, let's use that to find the people we really want to talk to, but then let's be human in how we reach out to them.
Welcome back, folks. This is Sean Simmerly with the Hiring on All Cylinders team here at HR Tech in Las Vegas, 2017. For this episode, we're lucky enough to have Jon Bischke, founder and CEO of Entelo, join us again. Good morning, Jon.
Good morning, Sean. This has been a fun show so far. Now it's just getting going, but a lot of energy.
No kidding.
Today.
I know. It's like so much buzz on the floor right now.
Yeah.
Some phenomenal products and lucky enough, some really cool panels. So I'll let you kind of jump in. Who do we have sitting as our guest?
Yeah, awesome. I'm super excited for this next interview. So I'm interviewing today Elliott Garms, and Elliott is the co-founder of humanpredictions.io. Elliott he comes from a family of recruiters, and the first question I want to ask is, the bio that I have for you says you started sourcing when you were 16, which is not a typical activity for a 16-year-old. So talk us through, what was that like?
Yeah, it was fun for me. I think my story, I was not a great student. I wasn't into school very much. I'm very extroverted. I was always getting in trouble for talking too much. So I grew up in a family of recruiters, and growing up, our entire basement was my father's executive search office. So I was around recruiting a lot, and as an extroverted person, I saw it as a career path where I could just talk to a lot of cool people. And so I started working for my dad in high school, and I think my first introduction to sourcing was a Shally Steckrell webinar.
Nice.
And just started kind of grasping, being from the younger generation that kind of grew up on computers. I had a lot of knowledge that my father, from a more traditional recruiting background, didn't have. So yeah, started with a Shally webinar and learned kind of the basics of Boolean logic, and that led me to Glenn Cathy and kind of got obsessed with Glenn at a young age. And yeah, I was helping my dad's business because, his business was heavily based on, 30 years of recruiting and filling file cabinets with resumes and folks that he had met at conferences like this. And so I was actually able to help his business quite a bit by diving into the internet and helping him find new candidates using kind of Boolean logic and searching different sites that way. So that was how I got started.
That's great. And the technology for sourcing has changed so much in the last 10, 15 years that clearly coming in as someone who is more tech savvy, right, gives you a big advantage. So I can see why your dad was probably very appreciative of,
Yes.
Of working with you. Well, I want to get into that a little bit more deeply because you're speaking on a panel later today about the state of hiring technology and how startups are shaping that landscape. So talk to me about what you're seeing in terms of the innovation right now, the stuff you guys are working on, the stuff other companies you're watching are working on. And do you feel like we're in is this a bit of a renaissance period for the impact of technology on recruiting?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think we're at a point where, kind of to my earlier comment about our basement being filled with file cabinets, we're arriving at this interesting place in time. Recruiting used to be very much based on proprietary databases and all of these leads you had kind of cultivated and built relationships with yourself. Whereas today, as you know very well, we're arriving at a place where we all have the same database. And that database is Google or the internet, and it's changing everything because it's no longer about what's in your file cabinets and who do you have access to and contact info for. But now everyone recruiting has access to virtually everybody. And yeah, that's a huge change, and it's leveled the playing field. So I think it's a very interesting time. I think technology is evolving so quickly that we, as an industry, are trying to make sense of what to do with all of these changes and all of this new data that we have access to. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting time to be in the space, and the big change I see is we all now have the same database. So how can we be smarter with that data to to get to people first, or have data other people don't, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the dynamic that we see in talking to so many customers is, for better or worse, talent's a bit of a fixed pie, right? I mean, we're not graduating more people in computer science today than we were 20 years ago. So you've got this dynamic where the demand for these skills is incredible, and yet the supply has not grown. So the question is what gives you the edge?
Yep.
And 10 years ago, if you were that first recruiter who figured out how to send an email to a candidate, right, advantage you, right? Well, today, LinkedIn has 45,000 customers, so no one's getting the advantage necessarily by sending an email. So if you go out and you talk to customers that you guys are working with, how are you pitching them on how they get the edge today?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's, it's very vertical specific, I think. We're super focused on tech and hiring software engineers. And so the big thing we're working with customers on, I think a lot of the industry optimizes recruiting for number of emails sent. Mm-hmm. And as you said, there's 45,000 people on LinkedIn. I know a lot of programmers that literally have 4 figures of unread emails.
Wow.
So we're, what I believe is getting back to the basics. I think the rise of all this data and technology has led to a lot of bad recruiting practices. Mm-hmm. Of, hey, now that we have access to everybody, we should email everybody. And in some industries that works when the supply and demand isn't mismatched, but in tech specifically, it doesn't work, and it annoys people. It doesn't warrant a lot of responses, and it even could hurt your brand as a tech company taking those approaches. I worked at Groupon for a while, and we struggled with that. We were a Ruby on Rails shop that was trying to recruit Ruby folks, and there was 2 different incidents where a contract recruiter for Groupon tried to recruit DHH, the inventor of Ruby on Rails.
I think I may have seen this. Did DHH blog about it?
He did a couple times, but it made our job at Groupon significantly harder when, hey, we're a Ruby shop, and the king of Ruby essentially is, kind of slamming us publicly. Yeah. So, we believe in, getting back to the basics of, hey, we have all this data, let's use that to find the people we really want to talk to, but then let's be human in how we reach out to them. Let's go the extra mile to do 15, 20 minutes of research. But as humans, when you read your email in the morning, is this a drip campaign? Is this a template message? Or is this someone who sat down and did research and really wrote something to me personally? So that's, I think, the core of what we're tackling is let's not optimize tech recruiting teams for how many emails you can send, but let's optimize for response rates.
Yeah, and I think that's so key, because I feel like there is a number of messages that need to be sent in the world for the employment markets to line up. And everybody wins if that number of messages is smaller, not bigger.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it means less candidates being inundated with bad fit opportunities. Recruiters don't have to send as many messages to hit their goals, right? So a lot of the thinking is not how do you send more messages, but how do you send less messages?
Exactly.
To get to the same numbers, because you clearly have to send some
Yep.
to recruit the people you need to recruit. That's really fascinating. Well, what as you guys think about your own company now and scaling, just talk to me a little bit about kind of what are the lessons you've been learning as a founder, an entrepreneur. This is a big market that we play in, but obviously it's also a market that's littered with, the carcasses of many companies that have tried to do things like this over the years. So what have been some of the bigger insights over the last year for you guys?
Yeah, great question. We're bootstrapped. We've been around for a little over 2 years now. So bootstrapping has been an interesting, finding that balance of getting the product right before really trying to push it too hard, but also being bootstrapped and needing to make money and continue growing the business. So, we've heard a lot of mentors or friends of ours that have kind of advised you should raise, where we've stuck to our guns to date and continued bootstrapping. And I think looking back, I think it was a great decision, because it forced us to really focus on, do we have something people are going to use and that will help people be more successful? And if not, they're not going to pay us and we'll be out of business. And so, I think this industry is, from my point of view, there are a lot of kind of flashes that come and go very quickly. I think, learning how to kind of toe the line of getting the product right, but also not trying to make that big flash until you really are ready for it.
Yeah, I think that's so key. Entelo wasn't bootstrapped, but we were pretty close.
Yes.
We raised about $3 million in our first 4 years, which if you're running a company in the Valley, it's kind of like being bootstrapped.
Yep.
So I think it was a very similar dynamic. We had companies that raised more money than us, earlier stage of development, and those companies aren't around anymore, and here we are. So I think as long as you can do it on your own, at some point it'll be painfully obvious, hey, if we want to scale this, we want to go out to market. But to the extent that you can bootstrap as long as you can, or keep the capital as constrained as you can, not spend it on dumb stuff, I mean, I think it's huge for businesses.
Yeah, and I think, from what I've heard, similar to you guys, we it really forced us to partner with early customers and work really closely with them to get a lot of feedback on what's working and what's not. And I think it's a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one more question for you, which is, as you think about the landscape right now, what are some other things besides what you guys are working on that you think are interesting right now? You can call out companies by name if you want, or just general innovations as you walk around the floor here, you talk to other startups. What's interesting to you right now?
Yeah, I think, data, machine learning are very, very interesting to me. I tend to kind of bat an eye when I hear a lot about AI. I think AI is super interesting, but it's still so early that...
You didn't name your company humanpredictions.ai.
We did not. I mean, talking to you about how let's optimize for response rates, not number of emails sent, on the flip side, I think there are a lot of industries where there's a greater supply of candidates or people looking for work than there are jobs. And I think in those situations, there's a really interesting opportunity to automate a lot of stuff and use drip campaigns and automate a lot. When you have candidates that are green in the market and looking for their first job, or in industries where there's just not enough jobs, they're willing to jump through hoops. They're not going to take it personally when they get a template message. They will fill out some automated questions and do some video interview. So I think we're in this niche of tech where it's very much like, let's be human and kind of go the extra mile because the tech people are so inundated. But I'm also fascinated in other areas of staffing where you don't have these delicate people that are getting inundated with emails, and they are open to kind of doing some of these steps on their own. So I'm kind of fascinated with other areas that aren't tech recruiting and the ability to really automate a big chunk of that early kind of sourcing to interview process.
Totally. Yeah, it's almost like you want two different processes, hard to fill, high volume, because they're so different in terms of how you would address them. And at the same time, I think a lot of people have the same process for both, right? And they're doing things that are dumb not because they don't know what to do, but they're picking the wrong problem to solve. So yeah, we think a lot about that. I mean, similar dynamic. We're mostly focused on the hard to fill roles, but we've danced with some technology in the high volume roles as well, because we think there's a lot of value to be created there.
Totally.
Too. So, well, this was fantastic. Really enjoyed the conversation. Best of luck with the company. I think you guys are off to a fantastic start, and we're excited to see where you guys will go next.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been awesome.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, man.